Our next section here will be the three candidates running for 2 seats on the Board of Trustees. Once again, they are Demet, Garry Davis, and Serebin. And the full numbers for these candidates too will on the opening statements. So we'll start with a 3-minute opening statement from Demet.
Hi, good evening. My name is Demet. I'd like to thank the North Shore Republicans for hosting us tonight. Thank everyone for coming to this forum. I'm running for village trustee because I believe I can use my skills as a legislative researcher and my passion for public policy to make sound decisions that will benefit all the residents of Whitefish Bay. I'm a lifelong resident. I know the history, the people, the issues, and the lifestyle of this community. I've lived here ever since my parents came here in time to send me to junior kindergarten at Richards. And then I went through Whitefish Bay Middle and High School, being in the rec department, Whitefish Bay Soccer Club, bagging groceries at Sendik's. And since college, I've permanently settled down in Whitefish Bay, buying a foreclosed home on Idlewild. I want to be available to you, the residents. I want to make myself available and to work directly with each and every individual to solve their problems, the problems of the village. I like to make myself available through office hours, and I have my phone number and email available so that any person with a problem with the village, I can walk down to Village Hall with them, present their case to the village board, whatever is necessary, and present the highest possible level of service for residents. I'm able, as a young trustee or potential trustee, to represent the perspective of young professionals and young families who will seek to buy homes in Whitefish Bay. I know what can make the community attractive to people of my generation seeking to live here. We'll seek to maintain sound fiscal policies for the village and make sure that in assessing the stages of our capital improvement plan, we do what is in the best long-term financial interest of the average household. And I will seek to maintain a safe environment for our families and properties by making sure the Whitefish Bay Police have the resources they need. I'd like to ask for your vote on April 1st, and I will be the candidate that will best serve the village and serve every individual business. Thanks.
Garry Davis. Good evening. I also would like to thank the organizers of this forum for the opportunity to speak here tonight and exchange ideas on village government. I'm Garry Davis. I've served on the village board 1 term, and I'd like to be re-elected in order to continue the work that I've been doing over the past few years. In 2010, my home was inundated by flood, surface flood, and sustained $80,000 of damage. And my neighbors suffered the same fate. It wasn't the first time. It was the last in a series of floods, sewer backups, and other calamities that we have in Whitefish Bay from time to time. During my time on the board, I've helped to put together the current CIP, Capital Improvement Plan, which lays out a rational method in order to separate the storm sewers and the sanitary sewers in the village over a long span of time, bit by bit, starting with the problem areas first, the greatest problem areas first, and expanding from there, without raising our taxes to the point where, frankly, we can't afford to live here. With respect to Silver Spring and the economic development of the village, I think what we can do to spur development here is to streamline the permitting process. Whitefish Bay has the reputation of being anti-business. I deal with many tradesmen all the time in the different building trades, and many of them tell me they don't really want to do business here. It's too difficult, it's too expensive, too many hoops to jump through. We hear horror stories about a gentleman who had an awning on his business in Whitefish Bay on Silver Spring. The letters on it were too large, and he got fined $360 for it. We hear stories about people who have problems getting their air conditioners replaced and get fined for that at an exorbitant level. I think we need to streamline the process, be fairer with people, and show business that we are welcoming them to Silver Spring and to our village. I believe in organic management of village lands, but only to the extent that it can be done at an economically feasible rate. So we're doing this already bit by bit. It's being introduced. I believe most village lands, such as the parks, can be managed in a green and organic fashion. And to the extent that that's possible, that's what we want to do. There are some other village lands, perhaps boulevards and traffic triangles and so forth. That's not possible, and maybe that's where we need to stop. We'll find that out bit by bit in a slow process of trial and error. I very much am in favor of a more robust evaluation process for the village manager in Whitefish Bay, and also each of the individual department heads in village government. I think that's necessary because we need to have good communication between the board, which sets the rules and establishes the program, and those who are to implement it. We can't afford to have missignals, miscommunication at that level, and we need to have accountability at the level of department heads as well as that of the village manager. And I believe there should be an appeal procedure by which citizens can bring a matter to the board directly. If they simply can't make any headway dealing with the village manager or with a department head, they can come directly to the board, present their case, and the board can serve essentially as a board of petition. I believe we should maintain costs in the village by keeping the rate of increase in payment to village workers at a rate that's roughly comparable to other government agencies in the state of Wisconsin. We are in a very difficult economic climate. We're seeing the payment of public employees rising at a very shallow rate, very little each year, which matches that. And I see no reason why Whitefish Bay should be any different. I think we have to watch our pennies carefully. On the board, I've been successful in revising some of our antiquated plumbing ordinances in the village. Now, some of you may have, on occasion, replaced a P-trap underneath your sink in your bathroom, and maybe you didn't realize that by doing so, you violated 3 or 4 or 5 ordinances in the village of Whitefish Bay. We've simplified that to a certain extent now. You don't need to have a master plumber come to your house and do this, but there still is the question of the amount that the permit should cost. Overtime, okay, sorry. Maybe we can return to some of these issues later. Thank you for listening.
Serebin. My name is Serebin, and I have been a resident of Whitefish Bay for 20-ish years. I'm a former teacher. I'm currently working as the director of a small nonprofit. I've been on the board since last year when I was appointed to complete a term, and have spent a lot of time really kind of getting to know what some of the issues are in the village. I didn't come to the village board with any particular agenda, and I don't necessarily have one. I feel like my role is to be here to hear what people in the village are concerned about, to really investigate and look at all issues from all points of view. I welcome and seek out as much input, as much feedback as possible, as much information as possible when we're making all these decisions. There are a wide range of issues that affect various members of the village, and to different degrees, they're important to different people. And I think it's our job to hear what that all is and gather as much information as we can. I too was fortunate enough to live on Fairmont and get flooded multiple times in 2010. So I will say that I'm keenly aware of our aging infrastructure and the need to really take long, hard looks at it. I very much appreciate the work that was done on the CIP before I came on the board, and I do know that moving forward on that plan in a very cost-conscious and aware way is really something important that we need to continue to do, and that is something that really affects the entire village. Nothing that happened down on the south end of the village, it can't be segregated from what's going on the north end of the village. That is an entire village problem, and we all need to be aware of it. Part of the role, I think, of the village board is to make sure that we're educating everybody in the village on all of the issues, and I think sometimes the problems that we have in communication are simply problems that have to do with education, and the things that are affecting people in various areas would probably be of value to everyone if everyone knew what was going on. So that, I think, is a really important role. So the communication that we have right now between the village board, the village government, and the residents, it's getting better. When we first started having the flooding, we didn't, at that point, there wasn't a lot of communication, and now we have improved. The the constant contacts that are going out are helpful. And it is true, you have to get out there, you have to sign up. And as often as we can, we tell people that. So there are ways to get information out. Can we do better? Absolutely, we can do better, and we are looking for ways to do that. That's one of our most important jobs. Thank you very much for all being here tonight, being very interested in what's going on in the village, and thank you so much for putting on this forum tonight.
Okay, now we'll get to the questions, and each candidate will be given the same question and have 2 minutes to respond to it. Just a note to the candidates, Peter in the front will be his timing things, and if he throws the red flag up, it means you're running out of time. So, first question is going to get to public safety. Please comment on your views on the status of crime and crime prevention in the village, and what policies or practices would you like to see implemented if elected? And we're going to start with Garry.
Thank you for the question. We have an excellent police force. They do an excellent job, and I would be against any amalgamation of the Whitefish Bay Police Force with any other jurisdiction. We had a very tight budget this past year, but when the budget was already set, the chief of police was before the board for a moment, and I asked him point blank, Chief, is there, and this is a tight budget, but not so tight that we couldn't find another $5,000 or $10,000 for protective vests or anything that you need. Is there anything that you need to do your job better? He thought about it and he said, no. So I think we did meet all of their needs. I happen to say we are also distributing defibrillators to individual police units, so they'll have that sort of a unit right in the police car in case it's needed to restart someone's heart, for example, if that should occur in the village. And so I do think they have an excellent force. I think they're well equipped, and I do everything to maintain it because security just has to be a priority in Whitefish Bay.
I would agree, but I think we have a top-notch police department, and I found that they're very, very responsive when there are issues, even small issues that people see, and they're very good at informing us of what is going on, the current issues that we've had with burglaries. If you are on the constant contact, you know when they're happening, you know where they're happening, what areas they're in, and what you should be on the lookout for. As much as our police force can do, it's really up to everybody to be kind of on the lookout and just watching what's happening. I'm very pleased with our police force right now.
We do have a great police force here in Whitefish Bay and a much lower level of crime than other communities. Shorewood in 2013 had 417 crimes, while Whitefish Bay only had 199, which is why I would oppose any efforts to consolidate our police force with other police forces in the area. It definitely has to be, public safety has to be an extremely high priority. So when we're looking to save money, this would be one of the areas where I would hold off. But overall, Whitefish Bay is very safe, and we should continue to make sure that the police force does have all the resources that they need.
Okay, now we'll talk about Silver Spring. Do you agree with the village's tax incremental financing plan for the revitalization of Silver Spring? If not, what specific steps would you do different? And Carol,
I do agree with the tips that we have on Silver Spring and the progress that we've seen on Silver Spring. I agree that we have areas that we could improve, and potentially the idea of looking for specific businesses to fill holes would not be a bad idea. But again, the growth that I've seen on Silver Spring since I've lived in Whitefish Bay has been wonderful. Especially on the west side, as Julie said before, you're seeing a lot of reinvigoration. People are down there all the time and down the street. So yes, I'm pleased with what I see.
I am also in favor of having these financial incentives. I think it's really important that we invest in having a strong business community on Silver Spring. It would be nice to have more restaurants. Shorewood gets a lot of business from Whitefish Bay residents, and if there's anything we could do to seek out different businesses that we think would be attractive to residents of Whitefish Bay, I think that's something we should pursue. But for the most part, it is reliant on market forces, and to some extent, there's not a whole lot we can do to force businesses to stay. One thing I think that would be a really good idea to attract even more business and foot traffic to Silver Spring is to, for the village and different community organizations, could sponsor more fairs and sidewalk sales and things that really make Whitefish Bay a destination for a lot of people, and that in the end make for more successful businesses and a better tax base for all of us.
Well, let me join the group in saying that I'm also in favor of tax incremental financing, because I'm not telling you anything new. When you pay your property tax bill, you know how high it is. And Wisconsin is a state that has a lopsided tax system in which very many things are paid for with property taxes as opposed to consumption taxes. For that reason, our property taxes continue to grow and grow and grow. TIF financing is one way that we can bring a development to the village that will eventually pay property taxes and will hold down property taxes for the rest of us. It doesn't happen overnight. It happens in sort of a ramped up fashion where they gradually increase to a full property tax level. But it's one of the things we can do to build a better Whitefish Bay for the future for people of Will's generation. Will said that he represents a new generation of Whitefish Bay residents, and he's right. We have to think to the future. And one of the things we've done on the board, for example, is to build a new DPW building on our own property as opposed to renting one in Glendale. And after the mortgage is paid off, that's a bill we won't have to pay in Whitefish Bay in the future. So we do need to look toward the future, what the tax rate is going to be here 20 years from now. And this kind of TIF financing is one tool we have to hold down.
Okay, this next question starts with Will. What are your views of the mix of businesses on Silver Spring? What, if anything, should the village do to recruit businesses to locate?
Well, I touched on this a little bit in the previous answer. I think, a lot of the development that's been happening on Oakland now and Shorewood, is opportunities that Whitefish Bay is missing out on, because so much of that is from Whitefish Bay residents going to restaurants and bars there. And, it's there is a market for people who want to have something fun to do that's nearby, and there's no reason why we can't have a little bit of that too. Recruiting businesses who are interested in doing something like that, I think would be a good idea. And again, in terms of just increasing the amount of shopping that goes on, if the village could get together with community organizations and get some events going, I think that would really make Silver Spring a more active place and be better for everyone. Thanks.
Yeah, I admit I feel the twinge of guilt every time I go to Collectivo over in Shorewood in the mornings. If you ever need to find me, that's probably where you find me, about 8 o'clock. Shorewood has built up a strip of businesses there that's very efficacious, and so has Bayshore, who was revamped. And if you look at the situation that Whitefish Bay is in right now, it's not like we can simply recruit another cookie cutter business to stick on Silver Spring. It probably won't survive, or might not. That's where I think private enterprise comes in. Private enterprises and investors can find and build a niche business that will succeed on Silver Spring now, given the fact that you have Bayshore on one side and Oakland on the other. And the Oakland case in Shorewood, they had a long plan of how to develop that strip. You saw residences move back from the Oakland strip and was replaced by businesses. And that took a lot of planning. Now we have to deal with that. And I think that private enterprise is probably going to be what will improve Silver Spring by finding businesses like the pizzeria that opened up. It's not a Pizza Hut. That's a specialty sort of business. There are other specialty restaurants that are coming on to Silver Spring. And I think private enterprise can sort that out the best.
I think we we have a nice mix of business. I would agree, it would be really nice to have a few more restaurants on the street. But I also think that part of the development of Silver Spring will be the synergy. And it's beginning down on the west side. We've got a really active group down there, a really active set of stores and places that people are coming. And things are going to start to move east. But again, that it is true. It is a lot to do with free enterprise. We can, what niches are missing and what people will fill when they come. I think it remains, it will be I think it is not a bad idea for us to go out and seek and look at what is missing, but I think it's going to be up to the enterprise.
Okay. Do you believe the current property tax rate is too high, about right, or too low? And what kind of changes would you like to see in how the village raises revenue? Garry, we'll start this with you.
Yes. It's too high, of course, but it's a question of what you get for your money. And if what you get for your money is a good place to live, a secure place to live with good schools, with an infrastructure where you know you can flush a toilet and you won't get a sewer backup, where you know if it's going to rain, it's not going to cause a street flood, then I think you have to look for a balance in property tax cost versus quality of life. We have a very, very high quality of life here. We want to maintain that. We have good schools, we want to maintain that. We have good streets, we want to maintain that. Unfortunately, it does come with a price tag. And so on the board the last few years, we've done everything we can to hold down cost and build infrastructure, and it's really, really tight. It's tough to do it. I think we've done what we've done.
I would say yes and no. I mean, I think that our property taxes are high, but we do have good services. Unfortunately, we're finding ourselves in a time in our history where we actually, our infrastructure is hitting a point in which it actually has to have some attention, and that costs money. And first and foremost, what a village has to do is be able to provide the infrastructure so that people can live in their houses and not worry about what's happening in the streets and in the roads, coming back up into their basements and making sure that their streets are well able to be traveled on. So this is a time when we have to be investing a little bit more money into infrastructure. I do think we do a really good job of looking at our expenses and keeping things as tight as we possibly can. We're looking at ways, there are lots of ways that we've collaborated with the school district, with different entities to try and keep those costs down as much as possible. At budget time, we were looking at absolutely every penny that we possibly could in ways that we could get things back. But I don't think anybody here wants to see their garbage cut a lot. I don't think anybody here wants to see their streets gone to pot. I don't think, I think the level of services that we have here is what people in the village want. And unfortunately, it does cost a little bit of money. But we are doing the absolute best that we possibly can to keep that down as much as possible.
I think our property taxes are too high, but right now, just with the capital improvement plan, there's just not really any hope for making that lower, until the very long term. And I think in the meantime, we just have to make sure we hold costs to the lowest level they can, given the improvements that we do need to make, and make sure we're as efficient as possible with the spending that is being done and will continue to be done.
Okay, the next question will relate to village services. What opportunities, if any, should be explored for collaborations and shared services with other municipalities or school districts? We'll start with Tara.
I would first of all say that I would have no interest in any kind of collaboration, well, not even collaboration, yes, but any kind of consolidation of our police department. I think it's important that we maintain our own police department here in Whitefish Bay. Places that we can look at collaboration, we do with the fire department, with the North Shore Fire Department, with the health department. If there are opportunities for the school district to collaborate with us, we shared certain types of equipment that we use, an aerator, the one that I can go off the top of my head, and the way that we utilize Payhill is kind of joint as well. In terms of, we can't have much to do with the collaboration between school districts and different municipalities, but if there are large equipment expenses that we could share with Shorewood or Fox Point or Bayside, I would certainly look for those. I'm actually open to any and all ideas, so if there are ideas for collaboration that come in front of the board, that would be something we absolutely want to investigate as much as possible.
Okay, so we do already do a lot of consolidations already with health and fire department. So I wouldn't extend that to the police just because of the low level of crime we have in this community, and I think that is a huge priority. We want to maintain our police force, but yeah, if I'd have to see an individual proposal and see what's on the table, but if there was a way where we could consolidate some sort of service with the neighboring community and save money, I could potentially be in favor of that, but I'd have to analyze the proposal.
Well, I'm heartened to see that there's so much agreement among people on this point. And I have nothing original to contribute except that when it comes to policing, Will mentioned the aggregate statistics of crime in another municipality. It's not just the amount of crime, it's the type of policing you have to do. In Shorewood, as an example, the population is about the same as Whitefish Bay, but it's concentrated in the rental units to a large extent. Instead, that requires a different kind of policing. So that would be another reason not to merge police departments. But I think the board is always looking for ways to consolidate other services as long as there isn't a decrease in the quality of service. I think what the libraries do is very admirable. Maybe we can look at that. They have a system across the county where they can send books back and forth. They save a lot of money. You don't have to have a copy of every book in every library and so forth, using new technologies, information technologies to find things and sort them out. So we should always look at things like that. Policing, that's just in a different category as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, relating to the sewers. The village is engaged in an extensive program of fixing the sewers to avoid the problems encountered in prior years' flooding. To pay for this, the village has created a new stormwater utility fee. Do you agree with this manner of paying the cost of these improvements? If not, what other methods or sources of funding would you suggest be used in this area?
I am in favor of the paying for the utility. I don't think there's any other way at this point to pay for the improvements effectively. We are constrained through regular tax means, even if those were preferable, which they may not be. And I think all we can hope to do, because it is unfortunate that these things cost money. We just have to make sure that in assessing this every year it comes up, we're looking at what is in the financial interest of the average homeowner in the long term, because the goal of this plan is to save the taxpayer money in the long term. It's to save the taxpayer money from property damage that so many people experienced. So we have to make sure that residents, if they're being asked to pay something, are on average going to be better off because we're spending that money.
The decision to go with a fee system, stormwater utility fee, as opposed to a tax, was not a decision that was made in a cavalier or quick manner. The board really looked at every possibility and weighed it and pondered it and cut it both ways and looked at it. If it's a tax, well, you can deduct it from your taxable income. If it's fee, you can't. But if it's a fee, there are more bill payers and so forth. Ultimately, after looking at it a long time and analyzing it, we came to the conclusion that it really is a user fee because everybody who has a roof and everybody has a patch of non-porous surface uses the storm water system, and so everybody should pay. It was a tough decision, but that's what we came down to, and I think it's probably the fairest in the long haul.
I would also agree that the change to the sewer utility was a long haul, a more fair way once you also recognize that there are some things that you can do to kind of lower those costs. There's a couple of rebates that you can get for rain barrels and looking at different kinds of infrastructure that you can do on your own property to help bring those costs down a little bit. And anything that we can do to reduce the same for the individuals. But I would agree that that is the best way to go.
Okay, we're going to do some questions from the audience now. Last year, the trustees voted down a plan to require hundreds of homeowners to replace their leaking sanitary sewer lines. Knowing that private property inflow infiltration is certainly the reason for clear water entering sanitary sewers, what is your plan to either regulate or incentivize homeowners to fix their laterals or install sump pumps? Yeah, we'll start with you.
Are you sure? I think Will is first. The lateral lining program that we had was in theory a good idea, but it wasn't practical. And after gathering more information and input of residents, we just came to the conclusion that we couldn't go through with it. It opened up more questions than it solved problems, ultimately. I love the word incentivize. I think that should be the linchpin of any program going forward to get people to close their laterals and reline them, because it's a cost question. How much benefit for how much cost? And if you incentivize it, you bring people to the point in their individual situation, they can determine whether it makes sense or not. So for example, sump pump or not, you could incentivize sump pumps by giving people a free hookup to the new storm sewer system when it's built in their neighborhood, as we're going to do on Hampton, and make it more palatable for people to invest in a sump pump and tear out their Palmer valve and so forth. So bit by bit, if we incentivize this, I think we'll have a better outcome than if we try to regulate it by saying, okay, everybody in Basin 1203 is now going to line their laterals, whether they need it or not, whether it'll do any good or not. And oh, by the way, if you do it, actually it could cause a situation that would cause water to back up around the wall of your basement, and it might, ruin your basement. So unless we can guarantee people things like that, I don't think we should mandate them. Incentivize it's usually a better way.
I think there are a couple things we have to look at. Laterals, leaky laterals are part of the I&I that's getting into the system. Another very large portion of the I&I that's getting, or the water that's getting into the system is from the foundation drains and the Palmer valves and the fact that we don't have a lot of sump pumps in the village. And so there are two possible ways that you can look at this. You can look at the laterals, and you can look also at those sump pumps. I also am hugely in favor of incentive programs that would be available to everyone in the village. That way we're not inundating any one particular part of the system. If, for example, we were to mandate sump pumps, which is something that people have called for, and I understand why they called for it, that is going to end up with a whole lot of surface water in one part of the village, wherever we decide you have to start here. So I would be in favor of incentive programs that are available to anybody in any part of the village, and that way if we end up with a pocket of people who've decided that they're going to go with sump pumps here and a pocket of people who've decided they're going to attack their laterals first, they may find when you look at your own home, your lateral may be televised and it's in better shape, but you really feel like you want to go the sump pump route. Every individual has to be able to make those decisions for their own house based on the circumstances that they have at their house. But whatever we can do to incentivize that, because that is village money. Any of that incentive money would be village money or MMSD money that we are deciding how it's going to be spent. And all of that benefit is for everybody in the village. So I'm very much in favor of incentive programs.
I think the fact that the basin that was most heavily hit, one of the most heavily hit basins by the flooding, also turned out in force against this plan to require people to replace or reline the sewer laterals, shows that it wasn't going to be a project that people felt would benefit them financially in the long term, which should be the goal of any of these projects. So in assessing any of these going forward, I would use that as a criteria. I think it is, fine if we, in the process of replacing the sewer mains, can offer people the opportunity to do their sewer laterals. And as of now, there is so much more that can be done with the mains and has been done with disconnecting downspouts, we can reassess the policy going forward. But and also, I'd just like to point out, it's really too bad that the board wasn't aware of the opinions of the residents most affected by this policy going into implementing it. And it is a good thing that in the end, their points of view were able to be taken into consideration. And I would work as a member of the board to make sure the people who are most affected by these decisions, who are being helped, who are being asked to pay, are the primary drivers of policy in the village. And I think that's the most important thing for any trustee to keep in mind.
Okay. By 2015, what are the top 3 things you'd like to accomplish at the Board of Trustees? And we begin with Sarah.
2015. First of all, I want to improve communication. I want to make sure that when I go to a board meeting and I look out, there are a lot of people in the audience, kind of like we have today, who are invested in what's happening, and we're able to hear from them and find out what's important to them and what the issues are. That'd be number 1. Number 2, I think it's really important that we continue working through the CIP, continue working on our village infrastructure. That to me is the basis of what happens in the village. And third, I would love to see the other end of Silver Spring looking as great as the west end of Silver Spring. I'd like to see I'd like to see more people leaving Oakland and coming on over to Silver Spring. So I'll look right there.
My number 1 priority, what I'd like to accomplish by 2015 would be to see the responsiveness of the board and of the bureaucracy improve. I'd like to see meaningful improvements in the level of service. That would be the first thing. The second thing would be for the capital improvement plan, the stages that take place over that time period to go off without a hitch and at a level of expense that is tolerable and planned for. And the third thing would be to try and identify some areas, if there are any, where we could save money. I think that would be a good goal, to find somewhere where we could make village service more efficient.
Well, ditto what my colleagues just said. I agree with all of it. And I would also just add streamlining permitting, again, to spur business development, organic management of lands where it's possible to do so, more robust evaluation of village managers, because I think we have to have accountability in the village. And also holding down the village budget as much as we can and bringing that closer to what happens in other government agencies.
Okay. What is your position on historic preservation, including preservation of our village's historic streetlights? What have you done to encourage historic preservation efforts in our village? And we'll start with Bill.
Well, actually, I happen to know someone who worked on the Tosa Village Board, or some kind of a commission that was responsible for their streetlights, and he commented that Whitefish Bay just has the prettiest streetlights of any community, and he really wished Tosa had streetlights like that too. So, honestly, I hadn't given much thought to historic preservation of the streetlights or anything, but it seems like ours are very pretty and doing good work. So I'd be.
Whitefish Bay has a wonderful sense of place. It's not a suburb that was cut out of a cornfield last year, created where every corner of it looks like some corners of another village. It's different. It's a real place, and history is part of that. And we want to preserve history as much as we can, and keep it as long as things are functional. But I'll throw out one other idea. One of the things I tried to do on the village board, some of my colleagues tried to help me, was to keep the Whitefish Bay Women's Club in their current quarters and to help them a little bit with their problems with alley assessments and whatnot, because they're kind of being priced out of the neighborhood. Organizations like the Women's Club and other not-for-profit, philosophically based organizations are part of the fabric of a community like Whitefish Bay. And I think the board should work to help them and keep them in place, because they're also part of the sense of place and being real in this world, part of the fabric. It's not a historical thing exactly, but it's part of the history of the village and its traditions.
Again, I haven't given a ton of thought to this for historical lighting. I do say that we really do have to balance making sure that it's bright enough where we are. And I think we do a good job with our medallion program, the Historical Society does, that we support the village board. I do think that like Garry said, the very variety of the housing stock that we have and everything that we can do to support that continued variety in our yes. I don't know what else to say. Sorry.
Okay, so we are going to go to our closing statements now. Each candidate will give a 1 minute, up to a 1 minute closing statement. And we are going to start with one and a half. We will start with Garry.
You have your red flag ready, right?
Yep.
I would just say that it's been a pleasure to serve the people of Whitefish Bay as a village trustee. Not an easy job. I've enjoyed it nonetheless, and hope I've been able to help some of you. I enjoy this forum because it's a chance to exchange ideas. Ideas are the basis of what government should be. And more important than for me to be elected to the village board again is to get the ideas that I'm interested in, and I think other people are interested, out into a discussion in public, and that would rise to the level of the board. The board should be more open to discussion. I want to push for that in the future, whether I'm on the board myself or not. And I hope you feel the same way. And thank you for listening tonight for being here.
So obviously, public speaking is not my forte, but I will say that as I've been on the board, I do feel like I bring a really good investigative sense. I tend to ask a lot of questions. I tend to look for information to try and make really good decisions. I agree with Garry, and we've heard from other people. We really do need to make the board very available to people, and I try to be as available as possible so that you can get what you want from the board, and that's really important. Thank you very much for coming.
I too would love to increase the accountability and responsiveness of the village. That would first and foremost be my goal, to make sure that the village is serving the people, channeling their opinions and ideas, and providing the highest quality service they can. And I actually think that's an area that we could really improve upon in the village. I've talked to a lot of people, over the course of the last few months, and there are a lot of people who would really appreciate a higher level of service and accessibility. And I think as a member of the village board, I could contribute to that a great deal, and I would make that my foremost priority. So I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and talk about the issues, and thank you all for coming.
Okay, I'd like to just thank the candidates. You guys, we were very lucky to have such great candidates. I'd like to give you a round of applause for them. Okay, that concludes tonight's event. Please remember to vote April 1st if you're not voting absentee. And have a good evening.